everyone. Thank you for having me. Gloria, thank you for reading the Daily Word. As always, it was a very, very good reading, good, smooth. And yes, potential. Who could deny the idea that potential exists, especially with the calendar page turning now? We have a new year upon us, but also putting things into perspective. Let's remember that there are many calendars in the world. So it's not only that there is a January 3rd for us here, but also there are many calendars that are not only lunisolar, there are solar calendars, lunar calendars, and they all will acknowledge a different punctuation mark. So to look for the common ground, we want to remember that the astronomical events, the celestial events, are those that we all have in common. So people in the Chinese culture, they have a lunar calendar based on the germination of a certain variety of wheat. And so in March, when the wheat germinates, that is the beginning of their year. And some cultures have a calendar with more than 12 months or fewer than 12 months. So as we're celebrating here in the United States and in this culture, yes, we have a new year upon us, but we also want to remember that so many people in the world with whom we are grouped, with whom we are joining, they have a different punctuation mark. So what we all have in common are the solstices and the equinoxes. And there we can broaden our thinking a little bit. If you're interested, you could go to Wikipedia. Now, I do know that the academic world kind of puts a little bit of hesitation into Wikipedia because some of the citations are not accurate, but they do have a great list of world calendars. There are dozens that some have expired, some are not in use, but so many ways of looking at the punctuation marks that we have. So here we are, we're marching into a new calendar year, but it is not necessarily a new year for the culture. The culture continues. Now, the title that I picked for this offering today, An Untitled Soliloquy for 2021, I chose the word soliloquy partly because I'm a fan of Shakespeare, a personal friend of mine. And here we have the complete works. And I've only read a few of the plays. I even was privileged to act in one. I was Gower, the narrator in Pericles, Prince of Tyre. That is an aside, but the bard had these words in As You Like It. The character Jacques says, and all men and women are merely players. Let me start again. All the world's a stage, and all men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. So I'll stop there, but it goes on to outline the different ages, and they all are meaningful. We all have to acknowledge our changes, and many of us are changing even during this pandemic, perhaps especially during the pandemic. Some of us are reinventing, amplifying certain parts of our personalities while allowing other parts of our personalities to subside a little bit. And I'm not different in that respect. I'm also seeking to put together my moving parts in different ways in order to have a slight reinvention. And so as we're marching forward now, some of us are relieved to let go of the past year. Some of us are apprehensive about the coming year. These are natural feelings. Some of us will be sorry to see some ideas of 2020 recede into the past. And some of us are not so optimistic. in the future. These are natural feelings, and we want to cycle through them without denying anything that comes up, because by acknowledging our feelings, we can come to terms with them. This is a big idea. So as we're going into my talk here, I'm offering that as a prelude that we're all players on this world stage. So I invite you to look into that soliloquy. It's really very cool, from Shakespeare. It's from As You Like It, spoken by Jacques. Well, another support for this idea of theatrics, maybe histrionics. I love that word instead, because it's been quite histrionic to witness some of the events of the past year. But Marshall McLuhan said the medium is the message. The medium is the message. Less so, he implies, are the actual words. The actual message itself is the medium of Zoom. We have this two-dimensional space. I'm looking at all of you, very beautiful and handsome on this day. But also, we are players. We are on a Zoom platform. And manipulating this platform is as important or more important than actually the talking head you see in front of you. Your management of this information coming through your eyeballs is more important than what I'm actually saying. If you agree with me, keep your hands down. Okay, very good, everyone. So the medium is the message. And as I'm looking around the world, I'm seeing a lot of different influences from the media, yes, but also from some of the classical sources of all of these ideas, all of the arts, all of the sciences, all of the mystical ideas, spiritual paths. All of them can come together. And by bringing them together, my theory is that a spiritual unfoldment, a spiritual enlightenment becomes more possible, because we get an overview. We get to see that our precious unity movement can help us to understand other movements as well. Incorporate them? Maybe not. To appreciate them at their level? Maybe not yet. But we can also acknowledge that they all exist simultaneously, and that an infinitude is accessible in any one path if we look deeply enough. I'm also thinking about the arts, because I consider myself to be in the arts, and I'm doing a lot of great reading these days. And one of them is this book I am rereading now, The Banquet Years by Roger Shattuck. And The Banquet Years talks about the development of the avant-garde movement. And these are ideas from the late 1800s. And one of my favorite people in the arts is Eric Satie. And Eric Satie was a student mystic, as all of us are. And he was a buddy or a sidekick of Claude Debussy. And they were in Paris, and they had lots of conversations and arguments about the arts. And Eric Satie had some great ideas of creativity, directions in music, such as air, S-P-E-A-R. But he had a lot of things to say about expanding our thinking within any of the arts. And I think it implies also within any of the spiritual pursuits that we have going. So with The Banquet Years, there are a number of very good references to concepts such as juxtaposition and parallelism, bringing ideas together that will overlap, or switching perspectives, not only musically, but in the visual arts as well. And Henri Rousseau is in this book. and Alfred Jarry and Guillaume Apollinaire. These are figures that were instrumental in the development of the avant-garde. And we have that in spiritual life today. We have a lot of blending, juxtaposing, parallel ideas afoot. And if we can incorporate some of these things, I believe it can take us to a higher level of understanding. And in considering the calendars again, this is a worthwhile pursuit because so much numerology comes up, and there are different schools of numerology. So in working with numbers, we can use a system called gematria. Now, this is not something that I am well versed in myself, but I know that it exists. And this takes us back into the classical area of the Judeo-Christian Bible, going back to the Pentateuch, which was written and assembled by Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible. It is said that if you take some of the key words and names and figures in Hebrew, and if you apply the numerical value to the letters, you can do some manipulation to get different ideas about the names, places, and the personalities in the Bible, in the Pentateuch. For example, David and Goliath. Young, small David took 5 stones and he conquered the monster Goliath. I'm using the word figuratively, monster. But the 5 stones, you can come up with the idea that the 5 stones were his 5 senses, and that David was the higher self who was conquering the gross, mundane self of Goliath. So he used his 5 senses, he used his knowledge, his self-knowledge, in order to come to terms with an opposing force, a foe, and that was his act of conquest. Well, we have the same tools available. Here it is thousands of years later, but we are still in possession of the valuable tools of the 5 senses and also 5 psychic senses. And these are tools that everyone can have. So even though the calendar is the modern Gregorian calendar we're using, we still have access to the older calendar and the events of the Bible. So speaking about along those lines also, the Bible also has the documentation of the changes of the ruling houses of Israel. And there are clues that give us that the actual time of the birth of Jesus is probably mid or late September. Some people will say springtime, and other ideas are afoot. Now, if you request it, I will send you an article, not written by me, but I will send it if you request it. My email address is readily visible in the list that Neil sends out. But you can ask for this article. I will send it to you. If you follow the references in this article, it will show you that because Jesus was observed by the 3 kings, and that, or prophets, or magicians, magi, or astrologers, because he was observed and because there was livestock around, we know that it was warm enough for the sheep not yet to be sheltered in their pens or shelters, but that they were out in the open. So we know it was warm enough for that. So different clues are going to juxtapose some of the ideas about the time of birth of Jesus. And all this is very important because not only do Christians revere Jesus, but other faith traditions as well. For example, now, in the Quran, the Holy Quran, now I have not read this book cover to cover either, but in this concordance, in this reference, it gives 28 places where Jesus is mentioned. And it gives 8 places where Mary is mentioned. And she is honored as the mother of a prophet. And I know a number of Muslims who have said, we are Christians too, that they observe and appreciate the teachings of Jesus. So some of the fine points may fade a little bit into the background as we consider that Jesus is a very prominent figure in most his spiritual paths, at the very least as a prophet, as a teacher, and to some of us, some of you, he is a savior and a way to achieve enlightenment. That's all important. So even though we have January 3rd, 2021, we're also acknowledging the presence of the Hebrew calendar around the time of Jesus, that they have a lunar calendar. And some of these dates change. You may have observed this already. But there's a cemetery on Lee Highway that gives out Jewish calendars. And I won't advertise them at all. I've given a few memorial services there, funerals, but they have a calendar. You can hang it up next to your Gregorian calendar and observe when these changes take place to help widen the mind a little bit, if that is a goal for you. So I've mentioned that the reference to the Quran has references to Jesus and to Mary, and there are many others too. Do you know it is said that the first Christian church was in India? I don't have that location, but also there is a temple in Tibet named after Jesus. So it might be that he traveled widely in the missing 18 years or so, the undocumented years of Jesus's life, that maybe he had a journey into other holy lands. And that's something to think about. The name for Jesus in Arabic is Isa. I've known a couple of young boys when I was teaching in DC in a charter school. A couple of the young boys were named Isa, and that's the name of Jesus. And I knew one young gentleman in another organization that I belonged to, and he was named Jesus, not Jesus. Jesus, of course, is the Spanish version of Jesus, but he was named Jesus. And he was self-conscious about it, and he didn't want to be called Jesus. He wanted to be called by his last name instead, which is also a Western first name. I won't say what it was. It was something like Smith. So he wanted to be called that and not be called Jesus. In the mystical setting where we were, it was too big for him. And I know what that feels like. I was given a spiritual name in Sanskrit, and I don't share that widely because it's too big for me. On some days, the meaning of that name is just too much. And I don't feel worthy of it at certain times. Privately, sometimes when I'm praying, meditating, sometimes I feel worthy, not all the time. So that's a blessing upon me that I do not share widely. And some of you have a spiritual name. Maybe you will draw upon biblical names for yourself. Maybe you will draw on something that means something special to you. And that would be fine. It's a necessary thing to advance on our paths. And each of us is going to advance. Now, I also have a reminder to myself here. I'm looking down at my laptop. Whoa, dude. This technology is sometimes, here's an aside now, the technology can be a little overwhelming for certain 19th century men like me, but it does not have to be. Let's not let the word technology overwhelm us, because even a pointed stick is technology. That is also technology. It is just a different way of doing some things. Making a tool of any kind is technology. In recent decades, there was a chimpanzee who was observed to take a small stick and help a fellow chimpanzee get a fragment or some debris out of the eye. And that was maybe the first time observing that another primate, a chimpanzee, was using a tool to help another being, a fellow primate. So that might be something that they are picking up from humans. They're advancing too. So we're going to use the technology to advance ourselves. These are tools we have. And this technology is very exciting because human minds like ours, grouped together to bring forth these amazing tools we have. We have the conditions now where something happens on the other side of the earth, and just about instantaneously, everybody knows about it. Everybody knows because thousands and thousands of brilliant minds got together to make computers, to use computers for tools, and it's up to us to use them for good purposes and use them for the best possible outcomes for the future. So mostly my message here is in keeping with the key word today, potential. To use this coming year, it happens to be the Gregorian calendar year, but we're going to use the potential available to us and use all of the tools, technological, spiritual, meditative tools, and use them for the best possible advancement for ourselves, for our congregation of unity players on the stage, for the development of our friends and family around us, and let us get behind people to support their upliftment also. This is an idea from Buddhism, that the idea of the being, the advanced being called Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva is the highly evolved soul personality who is so advanced that she or he can serve toward the upliftment of other people around us. So we can all be that way. And we can also see Jesus in the light of being a bodhisattva, that he was so advanced on the path that he was able to give his life, his existence for God and for all of humanity. So there we have another parallelistic or parallel idea, and even a juxtaposition of ideas, not only in creativity, but also in spirituality, where so many lives, the saints of all religions, have helped us to be who we are today. When we look at the Fillmores, when we look at other personalities who have helped to develop in their spiritual paths, they also had many influences. So no one is alone. No one stands alone. And I'm going to conclude a message now with the thought of the indigenous cultures of the earth. And I'm going to bring into play now a Native American flute. I'm going to change my position here for a moment. And I'm going to play show and tell with you now, boys and girls. I'm going to reach over my right shoulder, and I'm going to get a small rack here. Bear with me. Are you with me? Yes. I'm going to get a recorder because this is also a kind of a lesson, if you will. I cannot do anything unless I'm teaching something, you know. Somebody said to me at an open mic in the recent past, he said, "You're always teaching. You can't stop teaching," he said to me. And that may or may not be true. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Well, here now is one of the racks. I have over 35 different flutes, ethnic and otherwise. And I'm going to play a Native American flute, but let me show you what they are. Here is an unusual one. This happens to be two with two mouthpieces and two places where sound comes forward. One place on my right, your left, this is a place where the fingering happens to change notes. And the other pipe, which I'm holding toward the screen, that is a drone note, a drone note. So this is a modern variation. And I have a few others as well. I'm going to show you what's happening. I'm going to put these down for a moment. And I'm going to show you what the differences are among Native American flutes. Now we have here a recorder. This is doctored up a little bit. I put a piece of lapis lazuli on it because I wanted to. This is a plastic Yamaha alto flute. Now, where does the sound come out? You're probably asking yourselves this. I'll give you a moment while you ask yourselves this question. Very good. The sound comes through here. This is the windway. This is the windway. The air goes through here. Where does the air come from? Your body. And you put the air through, and it goes across this dark space here and out the windway, and then you change the length of the tube with your fingers over here. And you lift them up, this space gets shorter and higher in sound. Adding the fingers down again gives you lower sounds. So there you have it. Next week, we'll learn how to play the bassoon. That, of course, is ridiculous. It's a little comic relief. But all of the wind instruments can be learned if you use the recorder first, because the concept is very much the same. Now, you've all heard a recorder. I won't take any time to play it. However, with a Native American flute, the structure is a little bit different. As you see, the air goes from your body into the tube. And then the air comes up against this little block. And then it's focused down again into this lower portion of the tube. So it's one long tube with a block in here inside the tube. The air goes up over the top and back down. And here again we have holes that are played to change the length of the pipe, the tube. So this is the concept for the Native American flute. It is many hundreds of years old, not centuries, I don't think. Now, the oldest flute ever found was from China. It's about 10,000 years old, made by a personal friend of mine. That's not true. That part is not true. But this flute they found, I believe, is a notched flute. Oh, thank you. You're so good to me. You're so good to me. This flute is going to vibrate the air column as all flutes do. The notched flute is end blown, but the notch is where you produce the sound. And the ancient Chinese flute was made from the femur, a thigh bone, a femur, a human femur. We don't know from where. But it figures prominently in Eastern philosophy and Eastern religions that human remains are sometimes very important in their ceremonies. So also from the Tibetan religions, plural religions, they will sometimes have taken the crown of the skull of an important lama or a religious person, and they will make a small drum from that piece of the skull. I'm not jesting now. This is a fact, that they will take the skull and they'll make a drum to perpetuate the life of that spiritual person. So this ancient flute was 10,000 years old, and it still exists. I don't know what it sounds like. I've never heard recordings, so I'm sure that they exist for the playing of that flute. So I have here a modern flute. Now, when you play these things, this block here is movable on all of the flutes. It's not fixed in place. So sometimes you have to tune it a little bit by moving it. So let me try that now. Now, another factor. By the way, these are very approachable by any person. You may think of yourself as a non-musician. You may think of yourself as having no talent. I dislike that word, talent, because it implies that if you don't have it, that you're not going to go anywhere with your music. But don't let it bother you. I never let it stop me. So you don't have to think of this word talent. I don't use it in my home studio here when I teach. Now it's mostly over Skype. But when I teach, I don't like that word so much, because if you work hard, if I work hard, we're going to advance and just enjoy music. That is the operative word, enjoy. So you don't need a special embouchure, mouth posture. You don't need that to play this kind of a flute or the recorder. All you need is your breath, a steadiness of the breath. Now, here's another way to approach the Native American flute. There is a 5-hole system of fingering. This is a 6-hole fingering system, but we keep the left ring finger down all the time, and we finger around it. Some of the flutes have a leather covering over that finger hole. See that? It's there so that the player doesn't have to worry about the ring finger. That hole is closed. I'm going to put this one down, and we'll go back to this one. There are also in keys, you could possibly get all 12 tones of the octave out of this flute, but it's not in their music to play 12 tones. It is in their music more to play pentatonic music. I have a piano here. Here's pentatonic. Hear those notes? That is pentatonic, 5 tones per octave. And this is what this gives you. Okay, now I'm going to play this for a while, a short time, to give you a feeling for what it is. And you're going to hear me release my fingers and make a little chirping sound. And this is incorporated into the sound of the Native American flute. And as I'm playing now, I'm bowing with respect to the indigenous cultures of this continent. They were here thousands of years before the Europeans came. And the Europeans came also after the Vikings. The Vikings were here before Columbus and his entourage. So there's a lot of overlapping here. So I'll be silent for a moment, and I'm going to let you hear this Native American flute. Well, there's an offering of sound. The simplest, one of the simplest structures that we can find on Earth would be this kind of a flute. The sound is guided with an external device, and anyone can learn how to play the Native American flute. So this has been a musical offering. Let me turn the control back to Neil. Brother Neil, what do you have?